Most people think they know the story of Donnie Brasco, but hidden behind that is another man, the one who opened the door, who vouched for him and trusted him when nobody else did. That trust cost him everything, but even that wasn't his biggest mistake. Dominic Napolitano was born in 1930 in Brooklyn and spent his entire life in Williamsburg. On the streets, he was known as Sonny Black. His family came from Naples, which set him apart in a world mostly run by Sicilians, and that meant he had to work harder than men around him just to be taken seriously. So he did. He stayed quiet, handled things the right way, and gave nobody a reason to doubt him. Calm on the outside, but he knew when violence was necessary and never hesitated when that moment came. He built his name on being careful and reliable, and he never stepped out of line. Which makes what came next hard to explain. By the late 1970s, the Bonanno family was already in trouble. The leadership had fractured years earlier and never fully recovered. The official boss, Philip Rastelli, was sitting in prison, and that left the streets wide open. Carmine Galante stepped in and ran everything his own way, cutting people out, keeping more money for himself, and acting as if he answered to nobody. Other families noticed, and they weren't happy about it. Inside the Bonanno family, trust was thin, and consequences were heavy. People could rise fast, but they could vanish just as fast. And Sonny Black was right in the middle of all of it. That reputation didn't come from nowhere, and the way he built it tells you exactly how deep he was in. By 1979, the decision had been made, and Galante had to go. On July 12th, he sat outside a Brooklyn restaurant with a cigar in his mouth, relaxed and untouchable, or so he thought. The shooters walked in, and it was over in seconds. The bodyguards did nothing. Sonny was part of that operation, and when it was done, he was promoted to captain. He ran his crew out of the Motion Lounge, and on the surface, it looked like success. But that promotion didn't just give him power. It put him on the board in a game where one wrong move ends everything. 2 years later, 3 powerful captains were called into a meeting to settle a dispute. Gunmen were already waiting inside, and none of them walked out. Sonny stayed outside and made sure of that. He was now one of the men standing closest to the top, and that is exactly where the real problem started. He had everything by that point. His own crew, steady money, and real respect. But he kept pushing forward quietly, and people could see it. In a world built on strict order, that kind of ambition gets noticed. And wanting more is usually the first step toward becoming a problem. And then, right at the moment when his position was growing and the eyes around him were watching closer, someone new walked into his world. He came in as a small-time operator who knew how to move stolen goods, understood alarms and locks, and carried the kind of knowledge that only comes from years on the street. He didn't talk too much, didn't try to impress anyone, and stayed calm in situations where most people would show nerves. When he came under Sonny Black's crew, something shifted. Sonny didn't just see another earner. He saw someone who worked the way he did. Quiet, observant, and effective without making noise. More than that, he saw something of himself in the man. The more time they spent together, the deeper that connection grew, and eventually it stopped being just about business. It didn't stay professional for long. Sonny allowed Brasco into parts of his life that had nothing to do with work. They would sit together in the mornings, watch television, eat, and talk without any particular agenda. And then there were the pigeons on the roof, the ones he cared for and watched fly above the neighborhood he had never left. He brought Brasco into that space without hesitation. That is where things went wrong in a way the mafia has no real defense against. When trust stops being strategic and starts becoming personal, it becomes almost impossible to pull back. And that's exactly what happened. Once that personal trust was there, Sonny started making moves he couldn't take back. Sonny began referring to Brasco as a friend of ours, a phrase with a very specific meaning in that world, reserved only for fully made members. Using it for someone who isn't made is a serious violation, not a small slip. But he went further and started pushing for Brasco to be officially inducted into the family. Then Anthony Mira, the man who had originally introduced Brasco into their world, came back with a serious accusation that Brasco had stolen $250,000 from a heroin deal. Accusations like that don't get ignored. Sonny had a clear choice: step back and protect himself, or stand with Brasco. He stood with him, sat through the meetings, argued his case, and pushed until the accusation was dropped. By doing that, he tied his own reputation directly to Brasco. If Brasco fell, Sonny fell with him. He even went as far as ordering Brasco to commit a murder as the final step before induction, the last thing that would have made it all permanent. Then everything collapsed at once. FBI agents walked into the Motion Lounge and showed Sonny a photograph of Brasco standing with other agents. They offered him a way out: cooperate and protect himself. He said no, without argument, without panic. He knew exactly what that refusal meant and accepted it anyway. What came next was never just about one mistake. It was three things hitting at the same time. First, the embarrassment. He had vouched for an FBI agent, protected him, and tried to move him up through the ranks. In that world, that kind of failure doesn't get forgotten. Second, the risk was that he was connected to too many people and too many operations, and the possibility of him talking was enough reason on its own. And third, the ambition he already had. He was rising and becoming someone harder to control, and that made him dangerous regardless of anything else. Donnie Brasco didn't kill Sonny Black. He just exposed him at the exact moment when the people above him could no longer afford to keep him around. On August 17, 1981, the call came, and Sonny showed up the same way he always did. He was driven to a house and led to a basement. The first shot was fired, but the gun jammed. He dropped to his knees, looked up at the men standing over him, and told them to do it again and to do it properly. Then they did. Afterward, they removed his hands before disposing of the body. Inside that world, it carries a specific message: that he brought in someone who didn't belong, and that violation can't be forgiven. Benjamin Ruggiero, his close associate, was called in for a similar meeting not long after, but the FBI reached him first. Anthony Mira, who had originally introduced Brasco, was shot and killed in February 1982. The arrest that followed stretched far beyond one crew or one family. But the story doesn't end there, and the ending is the darkest part of all. Years later, Joseph Massino, the man who ordered Sonny's death, became a government informant. The same man who killed Sonny for breaking the code eventually broke it themselves and walked away clean. Sonny had been offered the same way out and said no. He followed every rule until the very end, and it still got him killed. He didn't die because he trusted the wrong person. He died because in a world built on suspicion, he trusted anyone at all.